Honey, do you know where the hospitality suite is? I think we're supposed to check in somewhere before the rounds start, and the instructions we got weren't entirely clear. I can't seem to find anyone official to ask. She had a lanyard around her neck that said Parent, Ghost, and a tote bag with what appeared to be a Connecticut school's logo on it, and the specific energy of someone who has been moving through this hotel with authority she has not been able to fully deploy. She was looking at Amara with the expectant warmth of someone asking the person they've identified as most likely to have the information they need. Do you work here? The girl she was asking was 17 years old. She was wearing a blazer her mother had made from a patterned navy blue, with the kind of precise seams that come from a person who does things correctly or does not do them at all, and she had a lanyard around her own neck that said Competitor, and she had in the bag over her shoulder a practice notebook she had been filling for 2 years, which contained, in her own handwriting, approximately 14,000 individual facts about science and mathematics and history and literature and current events that she had memorized in preparation for the moment when she would be sitting in this hotel conference room, answering questions faster and more accurately than every other person in the room. She was seated first. This information was on a printout posted by the door of the main conference room, alongside the seatings for all 32 finalists. The printout had been posted at 7 a.m. It was now 8:50. The woman had not read the printout. She had not read the badge. These two things, the printout and the badge, contained everything needed to understand who Amara was and why she was in this hotel. They were available to anyone who took 3 seconds to look. They had been available since 7 a.m. No one had looked. Amara said, "The hospitality suite is on the 3rd floor. The elevators are behind you." The woman said, "Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Sweetheart." She went. Amara watched her go, and then she looked at her watch. The competition started at 9. She had been trying to get to the contestant preparation room for 45 minutes. She had 9 minutes left. She went. Let's go back. Because the story of this particular morning starts years before the hotel. Amara Osei had been interested in buildings since she was 7. Not in the way of a child who likes to stack blocks, in the specific way of a person who notices how things are attached to each other and what would happen if you changed one thing. She had noticed, at 7, that the house at the end of their block had a foundation crack that her father said was because of the drainage. And she had asked how you fix drainage, and her father had said you redirect the water, and she had said how, and he had said you build the ground the right way, and she had thought you build the ground. You build the conditions, and then you build the thing. This turned out to be a way of thinking that applied to everything. Mr. Hassan had named it for her in biology class, called it systems thinking, pointed her toward books, but the instinct had been there since 7. At the fence around the lot with the crack, she had been working at leverage points for 2 years. The national championship was the leverage point for the scholarship. The scholarship was the leverage point for the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan's structural engineering program was the leverage point for knowing how to build foundations that worked. Foundations that worked were the leverage point for neighborhoods in Detroit, where the conditions had been built wrong for 60 years. She was 17. She had been thinking about this for 10 years. She had the answers. Today she was going to show the room. She was the daughter of Joseph and Abena Osei, who had come from Ghana in 1999. Joseph had come first, with a cousin, on a work visa, and had spent 4 years at a plastics manufacturing plant in Ypsilanti before he could bring Abena over. He drove a school bus for Detroit Public Schools, now had been driving school buses for 12 years. Abena worked in the laundry department of the Henry Ford Hospital. The morning shift. 5 days a week. They lived in a 2-bedroom house in northeast Detroit, on a block that had lost 4 houses in the last decade and gained 2, which was roughly the neighborhood's arithmetic, a slow, contested stabilization. Amara had a brother, Marcus, 3 years older, now at Wayne State, studying accounting. She had a grandmother in Accra who sent voice messages every Sunday and called Amara my daughter's daughter, which was its own specific category of importance. She had Mr. Hassan, her biology teacher, who had been teaching at the school for 11 years and who held a PhD from Michigan State, and who had said 2 years ago when Amara was 15, "Amara, you should try the academic challenge." She had tried it. She had found that trying it felt like the thing she had been doing in her head her whole life, accumulating information and connecting information and using the connections. But now, with structure and stakes, she had practiced every evening for 2 years, working through question banks and subject guides, and when she ran out of organized material, making her own. She had filled 4 notebooks. The current one was almost full, 14,000 facts, in her own handwriting. A round and careful script she had developed in 7th grade for things that mattered. She was competing for the scholarship $40,000, which was not a small thing for a family where 2 people worked and the mortgage was a conversation that happened twice a year. She was competing for what the scholarship led to, the University of Michigan's College of Engineering, the structural engineering program. 4 years of learning how buildings stand up and stay up under conditions that were trying to bring them down. After that, building things. Flood-resilient affordable housing. Specifically, foundations that worked. Drainage designed right. Building the ground. Building the conditions. And then the thing. The night before the championship final, she was in a hotel room on the 7th floor of the Marriott Marquis in Washington, D.C. Her parents were asleep in the other bed. She was sitting cross-legged with the notebook open on her knee. She was not studying. She had studied everything she was going to study. Had reached the point where more studying was less useful than rest. She was just holding the notebook, reading her own handwriting, the way she sometimes held it before a competition, as a reminder that the preparation was real and complete. She looked at her sleeping parents. Her father was on the far side of the bed, one arm over his eyes. Her mother was curled toward him, the way she always slept. They had driven 17 hours to be here. Her father had arranged for another driver to cover his route for 3 days, which had required 3 phone calls and a favor. Her mother had taken 3 days of paid vacation, which left her 6 days for the rest of the year. Abena had been working on the blazer for 3 weeks, had bought the pattern at a fabric store on Mack Avenue, had bought the navy fabric at a place on Livernois, had spread everything out on the kitchen table after dinner every night and worked until 10 or 11. When her eyes got too tired for the seam work, the blazer fit Amara perfectly and had 12 buttons and looked, to anyone who knew fabric, like something that had been made with specific intention. Amara had not told them she was seeded first coming into the finals. She had told them her score was high, that she was in the running. She had not wanted them to drive 17 hours for something that came with advance pressure attached. She wanted them to see it. She put the notebook in her bag. She turned off the light. She fell asleep. She was awake by 6:30. Her parents were still sleeping. She showered and dressed and put on the blazer and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Navy blue. 12 buttons. Her mother's seams. The blazer did what a good garment does. It made her feel like the version of herself she was trying to be. Not because the garment changed who she was, but because her mother's care had gone into it. And wearing that care into the room was a specific kind of support. She thought, I'm ready. She went downstairs to eat breakfast in the hotel restaurant. She had oatmeal and orange juice and sat by the window and looked at the street outside and thought about nothing in particular, which was the specific skill she had developed before competitions, the ability to let the mind rest completely for a period before it needed to be fully operational. She had learned this from a sports psychology book she had found at the Detroit Public Library in her first year of competing, which said, "The preparation is done. The night before the event is not for more preparation. It is for rest and for trust. Trust what you have built." She trusted what she had built. At 8 o'clock, she went back upstairs to wake her parents. Her father was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed looking at his phone. He had been texting with his sister in Accra, who had calculated the time difference and was awake in order to be awake when it mattered. Her mother was still sleeping, and Amara let her sleep until 8:15 and then touched her shoulder and said, "Mama, it's time." They all went to the opening ceremony at 8:30. The main conference room was large, and the gallery was filling with parents and guests. Dr. Simmons welcomed the 32 finalists and explained the format and said the things that are said at these ceremonies about excellence and hard work and the honor of the competition. Amara sat with the other finalists and listened and was present in the way she was present before competitions, fully, without reserve, giving the moment what it required. At 8:45, the contestants were directed to the preparation room, a separate room on the second floor, where they could spend the 45 minutes before the first rounds doing whatever final preparation they needed. Her parents went to the gallery. Amara headed for the preparation room. That was when the morning started going sideways. The hotel staffer who sent her to the wrong floor was doing his job correctly. There was a financial services conference on the 4th floor, and he was directing traffic for it. And he had looked at her badge and her blazer and made a 3-second decision about which event she was there for. He was polite. He was efficiently wrong. The woman in the elevator had been equally polite, equally wrong. She had said times, how sweet times, and she had said times, we love to see the public schools participating times. And she had been, in both cases, performing a generosity that cost her nothing and cost Amara 3 minutes of preparation time and the specific energy required to be gracious in response to someone performing charity at her. The woman with the Connecticut tote bag in the preparation room doorway had taken 9 minutes. 9 minutes of asking about the hospitality suite and whether the refreshments were included in the parent registration, and whether there was a place to sit and watch the rounds other than the main gallery because her back had been bothering her. 9 minutes of Amara providing information that was not her information to provide, in a room she was supposed to be using for preparation, because the woman had looked at her and decided she was there to help. 40 minutes total. 40 of the 45 minutes she had. She had 5 minutes of actual preparation. She had used them well. Because 5 minutes of focused preparation from someone who had been preparing for 2 years is more valuable than 40 minutes of distracted preparation from someone who has not. But the point was not whether she could manage. The point was that she should not have had to. The preparation room was on the 2nd floor. The elevator bank nearest the main conference room had a line. She took the stairs. At the top of the stairs, there was a corridor and then another corridor. And at the junction, she had run into a hotel staffer who was directing traffic for a different event, happening simultaneously in another part of the hotel, a financial services conference, and who had looked at Amara's badge and at her blazer and said, "The financial services conference registration is down the hall to the right." She had said, "I'm here for the National Academic Challenge." He had said, "Oh, I think that's on the 4th floor. Check with the front desk." It was not on the fourth floor. It was, as she had known, on the second floor. She had found the preparation room by following another contestant she recognized. A boy from Georgia. She had met at regionals. She had arrived at the preparation room at 8:58. She had been in the preparation room for 11 minutes when the woman with the Connecticut tote bag had appeared in the doorway and looked at Amara and said, across the room, "Excuse me, are you with the tournament staff? I'm looking for the hospitality suite." Amara had said, "Third floor." The woman had said, "Thank you so much." She had left. That was the second misdirection. There had been, by then, also the woman in the elevator. The woman in the elevator had been wearing a name badge that said she was a guest. She had gotten into the elevator at the lobby and pressed 2, and then looked at Amara and said, "Are you competing today?" in the voice of someone asking an interesting question rather than confirming an obvious fact. Amara had said yes. The woman had said, "How sweet. My son is competing too. What grade are you in?" Amara had said, "I'm a senior." The woman had said, "Senior in high school, so you're one of the young competitors." "My son is a junior at Andover." She had pressed this information into the conversation with the specific weight of a person who believes the name of the school matters. Amara had said, "I know Andover is strong in this competition." The woman had said, "They have a wonderful program. Very rigorous. Is your school a public school?" Amara had said, "Yes." The woman had said, "That's wonderful. We love to see the public schools participating. It's so important for these opportunities to reach everyone." The elevator had opened. Amara had gotten out. She had not said, "My school is ranked in the top 15% of Michigan high schools." She had not said, "My chemistry teacher holds a PhD from Michigan State, and my history teacher wrote a book about the civil rights movement in Detroit." She had not said, "The Michigan State Academic Challenge has never been won by a student from a private school." She had not said any of these things because she had been in the elevator for 45 seconds, and none of them were required to be said. She had gone to find the preparation room. There was one more thing that happened in the preparation room. At 9:04, 5 minutes before the round started, a boy came in looking for a seat. He was 16, tall, wearing a blazer from a school in Philadelphia. And he had the look of someone who had also been misdirected at some point this morning and was catching up. He sat down at the nearest open chair, and then looked up and saw Amara and said, "You're Osei." She said, "Yes." He said, "I'm Marcus, Philadelphia. I saw your scores from the qualifier." He looked at her with the specific respect of someone who has been competing in this world long enough to understand what a score like that means. "How did you spend your whole prep time in the hallway?" She said, "How did you know I was in the hallway?" He said, "I saw you. 3 separate times. Each time someone was asking you something." He paused. "Does that happen at every competition?" She said, "It happens." He said, "For you specifically?" She said, "For me specifically. More often than not." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I'm going to be completely honest. The first time I saw you, I almost asked you where the bathroom was." He looked at her. "And then I read your badge." She said, "That's all it takes." He said, "Yeah." He looked at his hands. "I'm sorry the morning went that way." She said, "I'm going to win anyway." He said, "I know. I'm still sorry." She said, "Thank you." The 5-minute bell rang. They both stood up. What Amara was navigating in the 45 minutes before the championship rounds began was a specific kind of tax. It was not new. It was the same tax she had been paying since the first competition she entered. At 15, when an adult volunteer at the Michigan State qualifier had asked her if she was there to help set up. She had said no. She was competing. And the volunteer had said, "Oh, wonderful," and moved on. And Amara had stood there for a moment and then gone to register. And in that moment, she had made the decision she had been making ever since, to name the thing internally, clearly and accurately, and then to not let it be the whole story. The thing was, the 3-second assumption, the quick assembly of a story from incomplete information. It had happened at that first competition, and it had happened at regionals, and it had happened at the state championship when a photographer from the local paper had photographed the wrong person accepting the trophy, and had needed to be corrected 3 times before the caption ran correctly. It happened in the academic competition world, and it happened in the hallways of her school when a new teacher assumed she was in the wrong advanced class, and in the library when the librarian asked if she needed help finding the young adult section, and in the world in general, with the specific consistency of a thing that is structural rather than personal. She had learned from 15 to 17 the specific discipline of this. You note the thing. You do not let the noting consume more energy than the thing deserves. You go on. She had gone on. She had competed for 2 years and won more than she lost, and arrived at this hotel in Washington, D.C. In the blazer, her mother made with the notebook in her bag. Seated first. Ready? Not the visible. Confrontational. Kind of tax nobody had told her she didn't belong. Nobody had been unkind. Nobody had said anything that could be named as a wrong thing to say. The tax was the sum of the redirections and the questions and the assumptions. The hotel staffer who sent her to the wrong floor. The woman in the elevator who performed charity at her. The woman with the Connecticut tote bag who asked her to serve as a docent to the hospitality suite. Each one was small. The sum was 40 minutes of her preparation time. She sat in the preparation room with 11 minutes remaining, and she looked at the door and thought about the morning. The 3 redirections had each taken something different. The hotel staffer had taken navigation time, the time of going to the wrong floor and realizing it and coming back. The woman in the elevator had taken something harder to name, the specific energy required to receive someone's charity graciously when you have not asked for it and do not need it. You could not perform resentment. You had to receive the charity with the warmth it was offered in, which required the same mental operation as translating a language you had to hear what was being said. Understand what was meant, and respond to the second thing without letting the first thing show. The woman with the Connecticut tote bag had taken straight preparation time, 9 minutes of questions about the hospitality suite. Amara had answered all of them clearly and specifically because that was who she was, and because being unclear or dismissive would have required its own energy expenditure. And the math did not favor that. 40 minutes total. 35 minutes of a 45-minute window. She had found, over 2 years of competition, that the preparation room was not where competitions were won or lost. The work of winning had happened in the 2 years before. In the notebooks, in the pattern recognition practice, in the thousands of hours of study. The preparation room was where you settled. You sat in the room. You held the notebook. You breathed. And you arrived at the specific quality of readiness that meant, I'm here. I'm in the room. I know what I know. She had 11 minutes to arrive there. She sat in the preparation room with 11 minutes remaining, and she took out the notebook. She had been filling the notebook for 2 years. Every subject area: science, mathematics, history, geography, literature, current events, fine arts. Every category that the National Academic Challenge covered. She had filled 3 volumes before this one. each of them filled to the cover. And this one was almost full too. 14,000 facts, give or take, in her own handwriting. She did not need to read the notebook. She knew what was in it. She held it the way she had held it before every competition for 2 years, as a reminder that the preparation was real and complete and in her hands. She closed her eyes. She thought about Mr. Hassan saying, "Amara, you should try this." She thought about the structural engineering program at Michigan State, which she had toured in October, where a professor had shown her a computer model of a building they were designing for a flood-resilient neighborhood in New Orleans. And she had understood immediately what the challenge was and had asked a question that the professor had said was the right question, which was, what happens to the foundation during the 10-year event? And is the foundation the constraint, or is it the drainage? She thought about her mother's seams. She thought, I'm ready. I've been ready for 2 years. She stood up. She put the notebook in her bag. She went to the competition room. The competition room held 200 people in the spectator gallery and 32 desks arranged in a horseshoe on the floor, each with a buzzer and a nameplate and a seat. The finalists were filing in. She found her desk Oze, a seated one, and she sat down. She looked at the gallery. Her parents were in the 5th row, near the center. Her father saw her first and raised his hand in a small wave. Not demonstrative. The wave of a man who knows his daughter does not want to be embarrassed, but also wants her to know he is there. Her mother was looking at the desk with Amara's name on it. Her mother was making the specific expression she made when something was happening that she did not have words for yet and did not need words for yet. Amara looked at them. She thought, there you are. I see you. She put her notebook on the desk beside the buzzer. She sat with her hands in her lap and she was still, and she waited. The tournament director, Dr. Simmons, came to the microphone. She said, "Welcome to the finals of the National Academic Challenge. We have 32 competitors today, all of them extraordinary. I'd like to introduce the top seeds by region. Seeded first, representing the state of Michigan, Amara Oze." The gallery applauded. Amara's father put both hands together. In the back of the gallery, in an aisle seat, the woman with the Connecticut tote bag was looking at the nameplate that said OSEI, A, seated one, and looking at Amara and doing the arithmetic that the arithmetic required. The rounds went 3 hours. She had been in the preparation room for 11 minutes when the rounds began. She had used those 11 minutes the way she had learned to use them, breathing, settling, letting the preparation make contact with the present moment. She had looked at the notebook, not reading it, just holding it, feeling the weight of 2 years of work in her hands. She had thought about nothing specific. She had been ready. She had competed at this level before the state competition, to the regional, but this was different. The 32 competitors in the room included the top academic challenge competitors in the country, students from specialized science schools in New York, from well-resourced private schools with decades of coaching behind them, from public magnet schools in states with robust academic competition programs. The room was not, in the way some competitions were, divided between serious competitors and participants. Everyone in the room had been serious for years. She knew this about herself. She was fast. Not just in the way of someone who had memorized a lot, in the way of someone who had memorized a lot and could retrieve it under the specific pressure of a buzzer, which was a different cognitive operation. The buzzer required you to know something before you had finished hearing the question, to recognize the pattern from the first few words, to trust the pattern, to commit. She had been practicing this for 2 years, building the pattern recognition, trusting it, committing. In the first round, she buzzed before the question was half finished. on a question about cell membrane proteins. Correct. In the second round, she buzzed on a literature question about Russian novels and was correct, and saw the judge across the room make a small note. In the third round, she buzzed on a chemistry question, enthalpy of formation, and answered, and was correct, and felt something settle, the morning, the 40 minutes, the tax. All of it moved to a different compartment of her mind. She was here now. She was doing the thing. She won 7 of the 9 rounds she competed in. She lost one to the boy from Andover, Carter, on a music history question that she knew but had buzzed a quarter second behind him. She lost one to Dev from Virginia, a junior who was fast in the same way she was fast and who she would later say was the competitor she had felt most challenged by. Not because he knew more, but because his pattern recognition was similar to hers, and he was coming at the same questions from the same angle. The semifinals were her and Dev on one side, Raina from Texas and Carter on the other. Amara won her semifinal in 5 rounds, with one tiebreaker. On a chemistry question about reaction rates, Carter won his semifinal in 4. The gallery knew, by the final, what was happening. 200 people, paying the specific kind of attention that comes when something has gotten very good. Her parents were in the 5th row. She had stopped looking at the gallery by the semifinals, had narrowed her world to the desk, the buzzer, the loudspeaker with the questions. But she was aware of them the way you are aware of something that is anchoring you, not looking at the anchor. Just knowing it is there. The final was Hare and Raina. Raina was from Houston, a junior at a STEM magnet school, with a particular strength in math and physics that had won her the Texas State Championship 3 years running. The final went to full distance, 14 rounds, 4 tiebreakers, 2 categories that ended in ties that had to be resolved with sudden death questions. The gallery was very quiet during the tiebreakers, the kind of quiet that means everyone in the room is holding the same tension. The last question in the deciding category was in chemistry. It was about the Arrhenius equation, the relationship between temperature and reaction rate, and she had been working on this specific area for a month because it had come up in the national qualifier and she had not been as fast as she wanted to be. She had gone home and studied it and practiced retrieval until she could get the answer in 2 seconds. The question began. In the Arrhenius equation, the pre-exponential factor. She buzzed. She answered. She was correct. The margin, the tournament officials would confirm, was 0.4 seconds. She won. In the spectator gallery, her father put both hands over his face for a moment and then took them away. Her mother was very still, and then she was not still. Joseph Osei had driven 17 hours and had taken 3 days of paid time off. And he had been sitting in the 5th row of the gallery for 3 hours watching his daughter compete. And when she won, he did not make a sound. He just sat. He sat very still with his hands on his knees, and he looked at his daughter standing at her desk, and he looked at the nameplate that said OSEI. A. Seated one. And he looked at the notebook that was on the desk beside the buzzer. And he was still. Abena was not still. She stood up. She stood up in the 5th row of the gallery and she clapped. And she was not the only one. The room was clapping. But she was standing when others were seated, and she clapped with the specific completeness of someone who has been building toward this moment and is releasing what the building cost. Amara stood at her desk. She looked at the gallery, at her parents, at the 200 people who had watched her compete for 3 hours and who now knew her name, which had been on the nameplate in front of her and on the seating sheet by the door since 7 in the morning, for anyone who had looked. She looked at the notebook on the desk. She picked it up. She held it. She thought about Mr. Hessen saying, "You should try this." She thought about the University of Michigan and structural engineering and what a flood-resilient foundation looks like from the inside. The cross-section. The drainage system. The ground that had been built right. She thought about the neighborhoods in Detroit where the foundations were wrong and the drainage was wrong because the decisions had been made by people who did not live there and did not ask the right questions. She thought about her mother at the kitchen table at 11 at night. Eyes tired. Getting the seams right. She thought, this is for you. She thought, I'm going to build good things. Marcus Webb, the boy from Philadelphia, found her in the receiving line where the finalists were congratulated, individually, by the tournament officials. He shook her hand and said, 0. 4 seconds. You knew it before the question finished. She said, the pre-exponential factor in the Arrhenius equation. Yes. He said, I've been working on that area for a month. She said, so have I. He said, you were faster. She said, I practiced retrieval, not just recall. There's a difference. He looked at her. He said, can I ask you something? When she stopped you in the prep room, the woman with the Connecticut bag, did you want to just say, I'm the first seed? Leave me alone? She said, yes. He said, why didn't you? She said, because it wouldn't have cost her anything. The 40 minutes were already gone, saying it wouldn't have given them back. He was quiet for a moment. He said, so you saved it? She said, I saved it for when it mattered, when she found me at the reception. He said, what did you say? She said, I told her what it cost. He nodded. He said, good. He shook her hand again. I'll see you next year. She said, if you make it. He grinned. He said, fair. She went to find her parents. At the reception afterward, in the ballroom adjacent to the competition room, the woman with the Connecticut tote bag found Amara near the refreshment table. The woman had been in the gallery for the final rounds. She had watched Amara win. She had seen the nameplate OC. A. Seated 1, and she had seen the notebook on the desk. And she had understood, in the gallery, what she had not understood in the preparation room doorway. She had the expression of a person doing the work of a late revision. She said, congratulations. That was really you were extraordinary. I'm so sorry. I had no idea this morning. Amara looked at her. She was not angry. She had decided at some point during the final rounds, somewhere in the tiebreakers, when everything required her full attention, that she was not going to be angry about the morning. The morning was the morning. What she was going to do was name it, clearly and completely, and let the woman receive it. She said, what did my badge say? The woman said, I didn't look. E. Amara said, my badge says competitor. My name is on the seating sheet posted by the door of the competition room at 7 this morning. I was seated first. Everything you needed to know was available. You just didn't read it. She said it the way she would state the Arrhenius equation. Accurate. Complete. Not decorated with anything other than what the fact required. The woman said, I'm so sorry. I should have. Amara said, I had 40 minutes of preparation time this morning. I spent most of it helping people find where they were going. 3 different people. She looked at her. I still won. But I needed those 40 minutes. And they weren't mine to spend. She paused. She said, I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because it cost something, and I want you to know what it cost, so that when you see the next person in a blazer with a badge, you read the badge before you make the assumption. She said, congratulations on your son's performance. She picked up a glass of sparkling water. She went to find her parents. Her father was standing near the door with his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who has seen something he was not entirely prepared to see and is still working out what it meant. He had been watching from the 5th row for 3 hours. He had watched her buzz in before the questions finished. He had watched her sit at the desk with the notebook in front of her and not look nervous, just present. Just ready. In the specific way she had been ready for things since she was 7 years old, and asking how you fix drainage. She went to him, and he put his arms around her, and she put her face against his shoulder, and they stood there for a moment. He said, into her hair, "Your mother made that blazer." She said, "I know." He said, "She's been working on it for 3 weeks." She said, "I know, Dad." He said, "It looked right. From up there. It looked exactly right." She said, "She got the seams right." He said, "She always gets the seams right." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I watched you this morning. Before the rounds, I saw you come back from the hallway 3 different times and go straight to your seat, and you were ready. Every time, no matter what had happened in the hallway." She said, "I had to be." He said, "I know." He was quiet. He said, "I know you had to be. And I know it wasn't right that you had to be. Both things." She said, "Both things." Her mother found them. She put her hands on both sides of Amara's face and looked at her with the expression of a woman who has been building toward this moment for years and has now arrived at it and is letting herself arrive. She said, "Chemistry." Amara said, "It was about reaction rates. Arrhenius equation." Her mother said, "You've been working on that for a month." Amara said, "It showed up." Her mother said, "Good." She said it the way she said things that were complete. The finality of a seam, sewn correctly. She took Amara's face between her hands again and looked at her for a long moment, and then she let go. They stood together at the reception for an hour. Dev from Virginia found them and introduced himself to Amara's parents with the specific grace of a competitor who respects another competitor and wants it to be known. Joseph shook his hand twice. Dr. Simmons, the tournament director, came and told Amara she had been watching her compete since the regional qualifier and was not surprised by the result, and told her parents she had never seen preparation like their daughter's. Abena said, "She has been working on it for 2 years. Doctor," Simmons said, "it shows." Carter from Andover came and said, "The Arrhenius equation. I knew it, and I was 3 seconds behind you." "Do you just know everything faster than everyone else?" Amara said, "I work at it." He said, "I can tell." He looked at her parents and he said to Joseph, "Your daughter is remarkable." Joseph said, "I know." He said it without performing anything. He had driven 17 hours and taken 3 days off work. He knew. Her father photographed most of the reception on his phone. He photographed the moment Amara received the trophy, a small silver column with her name engraved on the base, and the moment she stood with Dr. Simmons, and the moment Carter shook her hand, and the moment Marcus from Philadelphia found her again and said something that made her laugh. He photographed her mother standing next to her, one hand on Amara's arm, both of them looking at the trophy. He photographed the nameplate. He photographed the seating sheet on the wall by the competition room door, with OSEI A seated first at the top, which he had seen when they arrived at 8:30, and which had made him stop and stand in front of it for a full minute before going in. He would send all the photographs to his sister in Accra that night, in a group with the subject line, "Our daughter, first place." They drove back to Detroit on Sunday. 17 hours. Her father drove the first 8 and her mother drove the rest. which was the arrangement they had worked out on the way down. Amara sat in the back seat with her notebook in her lap and her phone out, looking at texts from her school, from Mr. Hassan, from the chemistry teacher who had spent extra sessions on reaction kinetics in October, from 3 friends who had followed the competition's live score updates, from her grandmother in Accra, who had somehow already heard from her father's sister. Her grandmother had sent one message: "My daughter's daughter has won. Tell me everything." Amara looked at this message for a long time. She thought about where the story started. Not at the competition. The competition was where the story arrived. Not where it began. Not at the preparation room. Not at the morning's 40-minute tax. Not at the blazer or the 17-hour drive. Earlier than all of that, she thought about her grandmother's house in Accra, where she had spent 2 summers as a child, learning to cook in a kitchen that was organized differently from the one in Detroit, and where everything had its specific place for a specific reason. Her grandmother had been a seamstress her whole working life, had made the clothes of people in her neighborhood for 40 years, had known how to fit a garment to a specific person's body with a precision that Amara would understand later was the same precision her mother had brought to the blazer. The precision was genetic, or cultural, or passed down in the specific way that skills pass down, not through instruction alone, but through watching, through being in the presence of someone doing something correctly. She thought about what it meant to be the first person in her family to go to college in America. Not the first with education. Her grandmother had finished school. Her parents had finished school. Marcus was in university now. But the first to be in a room like the one she had been in today, where the stakes were this specific, and the preparation time was 45 minutes, and the championship was decided by 0.4 seconds. The first to be there, being redirected to the hospitality suite, winning anyway. She started typing. She wrote, "Grandma, I won." The last question was chemistry reaction kinetics, the Arrhenius equation. I have been working on that area for a month, and it showed up when I needed it. She wrote, "The morning was hard in ways that had nothing to do with the competition. 3 different people assumed I was there to help rather than to compete. I spent 40 of my 45 preparation minutes helping them find what they were looking for. I'm still thinking about what to do with that, how to describe what it cost without making it the center of the story. Because the center of the story is that I won." She wrote, "Mama made me a blazer. It had 12 buttons. Papa drove me here in 17 hours. The answer was in my notebook, which I have been filling for 2 years. When the question came, I knew it. So that is the story." She thought about this after she sent it. She thought about what was in those 2 sentences that could not be fully explained to someone who had not been in the room. The way the notebook felt in her hands before the rounds. The weight of 14,000 facts accumulated one at a time in the evenings after school. The way her mother's 12 buttons had looked under the competition room lights. The way her father had put his hands over his face when she won and then taken them away and just looked at her. She wrote one more message. "There is also something else I will tell you about when I see you." The morning before the competition was hard, in ways the competition was not. I am still thinking about what to do with it. But I won, and I told the truth about what it cost. And then I went to find Mama and Papa. She put her phone away. She looked out the window at Ohio going by. She sent the message. She put her phone away. She looked out the window at the highway. Pennsylvania going by. Then Ohio. She had driven this highway twice before. Once when her family went to a relative's wedding in Columbus. Once when Marcus was deciding between Wayne State and Ohio State, and they drove to see the campuses. She had never driven it in the direction of something this large. She thought about the design studio, 4 years from now. A computer model on the screen. The cross-section of a foundation designed for a flood-prone area. The drainage specified correctly. The ground built the right way, so the thing above it could stand. She thought about the neighborhoods in Detroit where the foundations were wrong and the drainage was wrong and the conditions hadn't been built right. And she thought about being the person who built them right. Not as charity, as craft. As the specific work of someone who had grown up in the neighborhood and understood what the neighborhood needed and had spent 20 years developing the skill to provide it. She thought about 40 minutes. She thought about what she was going to do with 40 minutes. Once she was the one designing the conditions. She put the notebook in her bag. She leaned her head against the car window. She thought, I'm going to go home and sleep, and then I'm going to write to the University of Michigan. She thought, I'm going to build good things. She fell asleep somewhere in Ohio, with the scholarship in her future and the trophy in the trunk and her parents in the front seat. Her father driving. Her mother asleep against the window. Both of them tired in the specific way of people who have done what needed to be done and are now allowed to rest. She was back at school on Tuesday. Word had traveled through the school over the weekend. Her chemistry teacher had sent a group message to the staff. And Marcus, her brother, had posted something on the family group chat that had spread outward from there. When she came through the front door on Tuesday morning, Mr. Hassan was waiting near the entrance. He looked at her. He said, Arrhenius equation. She said, last question. Deciding category. He said, You've been working on reaction kinetics for a month. She said, It showed up. He shook his head. He said, I want to hear everything. Come find me at lunch. She found him at lunch, and she told him everything. The rounds. The finals. The chemistry question. The 0. Quadrisecond margin. The trophy. Her parents in the gallery. She told him about the morning and the 40 minutes. She told him about what she had said to the woman at the reception. I had 40 minutes. They weren't mine to spend. Mr. Hassan listened to all of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said, The Arrhenius equation question. Walk me through what you were doing when you buzzed. She said, The first 3 words of the question were, in the Arrhenius. I knew it was about the equation. I knew it was going to be about either the activation energy or the pre-exponential factor. The question continued with the pre-exponential factor. I buzzed. He said, Before the question finished. She said, I had practiced that specific question pattern enough times that I could trust the pattern. He said, That's the 2 years. She said, Yes. He looked at her for a moment. He said, The morning sounds hard. She said, It was. The competition wasn't hard. The morning was hard. He said, You know that's not how it should be. She said, I know. He said, What are you going to do with it? She thought about this. She said, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go to Michigan and learn to build things that work in the right conditions. And I'm going to remember what it costs to win from 5 minutes of prep instead of 45. And I'm going to try to make the conditions better for the next person. Mr. Hassan nodded. He said, That's exactly right. She went back to class. She had a chemistry test that afternoon. She was ready for it. She had always been ready for chemistry. She was going to be ready for the engineering program. She was going to be ready for the first day on the job. And the first foundation design. And the first conversation with a community member in a neighborhood like hers who needed to know their house was going to stand up. She had been building toward all of it since she was 7 years old, asking how you fix drainage. You build the ground right. You build the conditions, and then the thing. You put in the work that the work requires. and you do not let 40 minutes of other people's assumptions use up more than 40 minutes. She had gotten the seams right. That was what mattered. She took the chemistry test. She knew every answer. She finished 8 minutes early and sat quietly until the bell rang, holding the knowledge the way she had held the notebook, not reading it, just feeling the weight of it, trusting that it was there. Now, before you go, this story is fiction. Amara Aze is not a real person. The National Academic Challenge is not a real competition. Joseph and Abena Osei are not real people, though they are the kind of parents who exist in every city, who work at every level of every economy, who drive 17 hours and take 3 days of paid vacation, and sew the blazer from a pattern because the blazer they can afford to buy does not have the seams they want for their daughter. I want to be clear about what the 3 interactions cost. The hotel staffer who sent Amara to the wrong floor spent 30 seconds of her preparation time. Plus, however long it took her to navigate back and find the right room, call it 8 minutes. The woman in the elevator who performed charity at her, who said, "How sweet, and we love to see the public schools," and asked what grade she was in, spent 3 minutes. Plus, whatever it cost Amara to file the interaction and refocus, call it 5 minutes. The woman with the Connecticut tote bag who needed help finding the hospitality suite, the refreshment schedule, the seating options for parents with back pain, 27 minutes. Total, 40 minutes of preparation time that Amara had earned by qualifying for the national finals and that the competition had allocated to her to use for preparation. 40 minutes, redistributed to 3 different people's orientation needs, by 3 different people who each assembled a story about who she was in the first 3 seconds and administered the story without reading the badge. She won. This is both inspiring and the problem. She won because she was exceptional enough to win from a 5-minute preparation instead of a 45-minute one. But exceptionality that survives the tax is not the bar. The bar should be, the person who is seated first should be able to spend their preparation time preparing. The bar should be, a 17-year-old black girl in a blazer her mother made should be able to walk through a hotel conference center with a competitor badge around her neck and not spend 40 of her 45 allocated minutes helping other people find where they're going. She said it clearly at the reception. I had 40 minutes. I needed those 40 minutes. They weren't mine to spend. She said it without anger, in the register of fact, the way she would state a chemistry equation. This is the specific skill that people who have been paying this tax for their whole lives develop, the ability to name the cost exactly, without performing anything more than the truth. Here is what I think about when I think about this story. I think about what Amara would have done with the 40 minutes. She would have worked on reaction kinetics. Probably. She would have done another pass on the history question bank, where she was slightly less confident. She would have settled into the preparation room and breathed, and let her mind warm up in the specific way you warm up a mind before a competition. The way athletes warm up bodies, gradually, with attention, without force. She would have won by more than 0, 4 seconds, perhaps. Or she would have won by the same margin, but with less of herself spent. And the reserve would have been available for the next thing. For the University of Michigan application she was going to write when she got home. For the first semester of engineering school. For the foundation design she was going to make for a flood-resistant neighborhood in Detroit. 4 years from now. With everything she had been building toward. Every person who has been winning despite the tax carries a version of this question. What would I have built with the time the tax took? What would I have made? If the 40 minutes had been mine, we don't know the answers. We only know the winners. We can see the ones for whom the tax was levied, and who paid it, and who won anyway. We don't know the ones for whom the tax was levied and who had already given everything they had and for whom the 40 minutes was the margin. This is not a reason to feel hopeless about Amara's story. It is a reason to read the badge. Read the badge. Look at the seatings on the door. Spend 3 seconds before you assemble the story. The tax is not inevitable. It is the sum of choices that each take 3 seconds. And each 3 seconds can go differently. Think about the people in your life who have been winning despite a tax they should never have had to pay. Think about what they might have built with those 40 minutes. And if you are in a position to give someone their 40 minutes back to read the badge, to take the 3 seconds, take them. Drop it in the comments. And share this. Share it with someone who has been winning despite a tax. Tell them you see the tax. Tell them you see what they're doing with the time that's left. The answer is in their hands. It always has been. They put it there, carefully, in the handwriting that belongs to things that matter. One last thing. Her grandmother in Accra called on Sunday evening. After the drive back from Washington, it was 8 p.m. in Detroit and 4 a.m. in Accra, and her grandmother had set an alarm. She said, "Tell me about the blazer." Amara said, 12 buttons. Mama made it from a pattern, navy blue. Her grandmother said, "Did it look right?" Amara said, "It looked exactly right." Her grandmother said, "Good. That's what matters. You go into a room looking like you belong in it. And then you show them you do." Amara said, "I showed them." Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You also told the truth about the morning, about what it cost." Amara said, "Yes." Her grandmother said, "That's important too. Not just winning, the record of what it cost." Amara said, "I know." Her grandmother said, "Because the next girl who comes to that competition, she's going to have the same morning. Unless someone made the record. Unless someone put it down in writing and said, this is what it cost. This is what was taken. This is what she had to spend her 40 minutes on when her 40 minutes should have been hers." Amara said, "I know. Grandma." Her grandmother said, "So you're the record now. You and the notebook and the blazer and the 40 minutes and the Arrhenius equation. All of it is the record." Amara thought about this. She thought about the practice notebooks on her desk at home, 4 full ones, plus the current one. Nearly full. The record was already there. It had always been there. She said, "I'm going to keep making the record." Her grandmother said, "Good. That is how it gets better. One record at a time." She said, "Good night." "My daughter's daughter." Amara said, "Good night, Grandma." She put down the phone. She looked at the notebook on her desk. She thought about what she was going to put in volume 6. She picked up a pen. She started writing. She had been making the record since she was 15. She was going to keep making it. Volume 6. Then 7. Then whatever came after. Every fact. In her own handwriting. Every answer she had worked for. Set down carefully in the notebook that belonged to things that mattered. And eventually, after the University of Michigan, after the engineering program, after the first job and the first community meeting and the first foundation design, she was going to build something that stood up in conditions that had previously made standing up impossible. She was going to build the ground right. She was going to show them what 45 minutes of preparation looks like when the 45 minutes are actually yours. She put the pen down. She set the notebook on her desk where she would see it in the morning. She thought, Volume 6 starts tomorrow. She thought, I've been building the conditions since I was 7 years old, and I know what I'm building toward, and I know how to get there. The morning in Washington cost 40 minutes. What I build will last longer than 40 minutes. She turned off the light. She went to bed. In the morning, she woke up and went to school and paid attention in every class and came home and opened the notebook to the first blank page of Volume 6 and wrote the date at the top. In the round, careful handwriting that she used for things that mattered, she started writing. The summer session at the University of Michigan's College of Engineering began on a Tuesday in late June with 90-degree heat rising off the asphalt on North Campus. Amara Ose stood outside the G. Brown Laboratories carrying her backpack. Volume 6 of her notebook inside it. And wearing the navy blazer. Her mother had taken the sleeves up by half an inch the weekend before. Sitting at the kitchen table in Detroit under the yellow lamp while the radio played High Life from Accra. Working the heavy needle through the wool until the cuff hit exactly where an engineer's wrist meets her watch. You don't take it off because it's hot. Abena had said, biting the thread. You take it off when you are finished showing them. Amara pushed open the double glass doors of the Civil and Environmental Engineering complex. The main atrium was filled with 40 fellowship recipients, the top incoming freshmen selected for the prestigious infrastructure design cohort funded by the Great Lakes Urban Resilience Initiative. At the center of the hall stood a 5-tier hydraulic model of the Detroit River Basin, complete with automated floodgates, pressure sensors, and acrylic retention basins. Standing beside the control console was Dr. Preston Vance, the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Research. He was 60, wearing a tailored linen jacket, holding a clipboard with a gold clip, and talking to a cluster of 3 students whose parents were standing nearby with donor lanyards around their necks. Amara walked up to the check-in table near the console. Name? The student coordinator asked without looking up from her laptop. Amara Ose. Fellowship Cohort A. Doctor. Vance stopped mid-sentence. He turned, his eyes dropping from Amara's face to the navy blazer, then to her canvas bag, and finally to her hands, which were holding her notebook. Excuse me, Vance said, stepping over. The student check-in is for the fellows. Catered setup for the luncheon is through the loading dock on the east wing. Amara did not move her feet. I'm not catering. Dr. Vance. I'm Amara Ose. I was awarded the Great Lakes Infrastructure Fellowship. Vance adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, looking at the printout on his clipboard. The Ose file. The National Academic Challenge winner. He said the words with the specific dry cadence of an academic who considered non-university competitions an administrative nuisance. Yes. The provost's office pushed that through under the public school outreach allocation. It was awarded on merit score, Amara said. Of course it was, Vance replied smoothly, not looking at her. We celebrate broad participation, but you should know that Cohort A is assigned to the Deep Strata Foundation modeling team. It requires extensive differential calculus and finite element analysis. It is not general trivia. If you find the mathematical modeling overwhelming, we can reassign you to the Community Survey Division by Friday without penalty to your base stipend. Beside Vance stood Julian Mercer, an 18-year-old from a private preparatory academy in Bloomfield Hills, whose father sat on the university's Board of Regents. Julian had a custom leather tablet case and a slight, resting smirk. Don't worry, Dr. Vance, Julian said, looking at Amara's 12 buttons. If she needs help reading the strain gauges on the shake table, I'm happy to explain the units. Amara looked at Julian, then back at Vance. What is the baseline shear modulus you're assuming for the clay strata beneath the East Jefferson corridor? Vance blinked. Standard regional default is 45 megapascals. The Detroit Water and Sewerage Department bore logs from 2024, showed heavy organic silt saturation below 12 meters. Amara said, her voice flat and even. The effective shear modulus drops to 28 under a 10-year storm surge. If you run your seismic load test at 45, your model will show the retention walls holding when the real concrete will shear at the footings. Silence dropped over the console. Doctor. Vance's jaw tightened. He tapped his pen against the gold clipboard twice. We use the state survey parameters. Miss Oze. When you have completed your first year of foundational mechanics, you may critique the department's baseline constants. Until then, take Station 4 at the back. Station 4 was located in the subterranean geotechnical lab, 30 feet below ground level, where the high-pressure soil tanks and hydraulic actuators hummed beneath fluorescent strips. The task for the first 2 weeks of the fellowship was direct. Design and stress test a 1/50th scale foundation system for a proposed affordable housing complex in the Jefferson-Chalmers neighborhood of Detroit, a low-lying district built over ancient canal beds that flooded every spring. The winning design would receive a $500,000 implementation grant from the City Council and serve as the pilot for 30 city blocks. Amara sat at the steel workstation. She opened volume 6 of her notebook. On the first page, she had drawn the soil stratigraphy of northeast Detroit from memory. Topsoil. Fine sand. Mottled yellow clay. Soft blue clay. Hardpan. Limestone. She knew the depth of the water table on every street between Mac and the river because her father had driven his bus through the standing water on those roads for 12 years. And every March, he came home and told her which intersections were sinking. You're not using the automated CAD solver? The voice came from the next bench. It was a girl with thick glasses, a faded Detroit Tigers cap, and calloused fingers stained with graphite. I use the solver to verify. Amara said, I do the load distributions by hand first, so I know what the solver is hiding. The girl extended a hand. Kendra Ramos. Castech. Transferred from Wayne County Community College. Amara shook it. Amara. Martin Luther King High. Kendra let out a short, quiet breath. King, you're the girl who won nationals on the Arrhenius question? My uncle works facilities at Wayne State, he said. The whole district was talking about it. Kendra pulled her stool closer. Glancing toward the front of the lab where Julian Mercer and 2 other fellows were clustering around the lab's primary 3-dimensional stress simulator, watch your back with Mercer. His dad funded the new wing of this building. Vance gave him the pre-calibrated soil data packets 2 weeks before the rest of us got here. He has the state survey logs? Amara asked. He has the sanitized ones. Kendra muttered. The ones that pretend Detroit is built on dry gravel instead of swamp clay and broken storm pipes. At the front of the lab, Julian activated the hydraulic actuator on the central testing rig. A massive piston slammed downward with a mechanical groan. Testing a scaled concrete caisson. 120 kilonewtons, Julian called out to the teaching assistant. 0 deflection on the footing. The Mercer Foundation holds at 200% of design load. The teaching assistant, a doctoral student named Marcus Chen, logged the number on the masterboard. Excellent work. Julianne, that puts your group first on the efficiency ranking. Amara stood up from Station 4. She walked over to the test tank. She looked at the soil bed Julian had prepared. It was light gray, uniform, and dry. You didn't saturate the subbase, Amara said. Julian turned, his smile thinning. The lab protocol specifies 20% moisture content for standardized testing. A 50-year storm in Jefferson-Chalmers saturates the soil to 95% within 48 hours. Amara said. The water doesn't come from above. It backs up through the storm mains from the river. It enters the subbase from the bottom up. If you don't run water through the lower gravel layer, your caisson isn't resting on soil. It's resting on a dry brick that doesn't exist in reality. Marcus, Julian said, turning his back on Amara to address the teaching assistant. Are we required to take design critiques from incoming freshmen who haven't logged an hour of accredited lab time? Marcus Chen looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat, adjusting his clipboard. Miss Osei. The standardized rubric is set by Dr. Vance. We maintain consistency across all trials. Then the rubric is testing a building that will collapse, Amara said. That evening, Amara did not take the commuter bus back to Detroit. She stayed in the lab until the overhead lights clicked off at 10, working by the glow of a single desk lamp at Station 4. She built her scale model by hand. While the other teams used standard precast resin blocks, Amara constructed a composite foundation system using miniature helical steel piles anchored into a simulated hardpan layer, surrounded by an expanded shale aggregate drainage sleeve. She had found the calculation in Volume 4 of her notebook, derived from a 1974 Dutch civil engineering journal Mr. Hassan had photocopied for her when she was 16. Dynamic load dissipation in saturated cohesive silts. At 11:15, the heavy fire door at the end of the corridor clicked open. A man in gray work coveralls entered, carrying a mop bucket and a ring of brass keys. He was in his late 50s, his shoulders slightly rounded from decades of physical labor, wearing a name tag that read ×E, Boateng, Facilities. He stopped when he saw Amara sitting at the bench in her navy blazer. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke in Twi, his accent thick with the cadence of the Ashanti region. Why are you still here in the dark? My daughter? Amara looked up, her shoulders dropping an inch. She answered in the same language. I am calculating the water pressure. Uncle, the machine says the ground is dry. But the ground is not dry. The man set his mop against the wall. He walked over, looked at the hand-drawn calculations covering her paper, and then looked at the 12 buttons on her blazer. My sister's son went to school here 20 years ago, the man said, switching to English with a quiet, raspy voice. He was in the electrical building. Every night he stayed until the cleaning crew came in. He told me the hardest part was not the mathematics. He said the hardest part was that when he answered a question correctly, they looked at his paper 3 times to see who helped him. Did he finish? Amara asked. He builds the power grid in Takoradi now, Boateng said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a clean, lint-free cloth used for cleaning precision optics, and laid it on her desk. Wipe the oil off the testing valves before you run the pump. The day crew leaves the pressure lines dirty on Station 4. They think nobody uses it. Amara took the cloth. Thank you. Uncle. Do not let them make you small, Boateng said, picking up his mop. The ground knows what it can hold. It does not care about their names. On Thursday morning of the second week, Dr. Vance called the entire cohort to the testing pit for the final preliminary evaluations. City representatives from the Detroit Housing Commission were present, 2 senior civil engineers, and a city planner named Marcus Albright, who had spent 20 years trying to keep the Lower East Side of Detroit from washing into Lake Street. Claire. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Vance announced, standing at the podium. Today we evaluate the top 3 design candidates for the Jefferson-Chalmers pilot project. The winning model will be fabricated at full scale for testing at the State Testing Facility in Livonia. Julian Mercer stepped up first. His team had constructed an 8-story acrylic model atop an 8-inch concrete slab foundation. Our design prioritizes material efficiency and rapid deployment, Julian said, clicking through his slides. We utilize a post-tension slab resting on an engineered sand-gravel subbase. It reduces excavation costs by 34%. Marcus Albright, the city planner, leaned forward. What happens when the river stage rises 3 feet above sea level and the municipal storm gate at Connor Creek backs up? The perimeter subdrains divert the water to the municipal sewer. Julian answered confidently. And when the municipal sewer is already full? Albright asked. Doctor, Vance stepped in smoothly. The finite element analysis indicates the slab's rigid geometry distributes the load evenly, even under transient saturation. Julian, demonstrate the load test. Julian activated the hydraulic rig. The steel rams pushed down on the slab. 50 kilonewtons. 100. 150. The digital display flashed green. Deflection is within 0.02 millimeters. Julian said, looking back at Amara with a cold grin. Total stability. Doctor, Vance turned to the city officials. As you can see, the Mercer design combines theoretical rigor with economic feasibility. We recommend this for the Livonia full-scale build. Wait. Amara's voice cut through the hum of the cooling fans. She stepped forward from the back row. She was carrying her test tank, a heavy, steel-framed glass box containing her miniature helical pile foundation. Completely immersed in dark, dense Detroit riverbed clay she had brought from the riverbank in 5-gallon buckets on the morning bus. Dr. Vance, Amara said, you ran the load test, but you didn't run the hydraulic back pressure cycle. Lab Protocol 4.2 states that all coastal foundation prototypes must undergo simultaneous mechanical loading and hydraulic surge testing. Vance's face darkened. Miss Osei, we do not have time to run non-standard bench tests for unvetted prototypes. It's not non-standard, Marcus Albright said, his voice deep and sudden. The city planner stood up from his chair. He looked at Amara's glass tank, then at the 12 buttons on her navy blazer. It's Section 12 of the City Building Code. Who prepared this clay? I did, Amara said. It's taken from the corner of Scripps Street and Continental. Wet unit weight is 116 pounds per cubic foot. Liquid limit 52. Plasticity index 28. It is the exact soil profile of the project site. Albright looked at Vance. Put her tank on the rig. Preston. Vance hesitated, his hand tightening around his clipboard. The rig is calibrated for the standard mounts. Use the universal bracket, Albright said. Let's see the test. Marcus Chen, the teaching assistant, glanced at Vance, but Albright's presence left no room for refusal. Chand. Chen helped Amara bolt the steel frame tank onto the hydraulic testing platform and connected the 2-inch high-pressure water feed to the base of the tank. Julian Mercer crossed his arms, leaning against the railing. The pile heads are too narrow, he muttered to his group. The shear stress will snap them at 40 kilonewtons. Amara stepped up to the control console. Begin load test, Chen announced. The hydraulic ram descended onto Amara's foundation model. 50 kilonewtons. The digital readouts held steady. 100 kilonewtons. The miniature helical piles transferred the load straight through the saturated clay into the simulated hardpan below. Now introduce the surge pressure, Albright commanded. Chen turned the valve on the bottom water line. High-pressure water flooded into the lower gravel sleeve, simulating a massive river backflow. The clay inside the tank began to liquefy, churning into a dark, unstable slurry. The digital display on the console began to flicker. Sheer stress rising. Chen called out, "Lateral resistance in the clay dropped 80%. Julian's eyes widened. In the churning slurry, Amara's model did not move. The expanded shale drainage sleeve dissipated the poor water pressure, channeling the water upward through perforated release vents, while the deep helical piles remained locked in the hardpan base. 150 kilonewtons. 200 kilonewtons. The display held solid green. Deflection. 0. Kill the pressure, Albright said quietly. The pumps whined down into silence. The city planner walked down the steps into the testing pit. He put his hands on the glass tank, looking at the black clay, the water draining cleanly through the release vents, and the dead straight alignment of the steel piles. He looked up at Amara. "Where did you learn to vent the sleeve through the pile cap?" Volume 4. Amara said, "A Dutch coastal drainage survey from 1974, and my father drives the route on Jefferson. Every spring, the road lifts 2 inches because the water has nowhere to go. If you give the water a path out, the foundation doesn't have to fight the river. It lets the river pass." Albright stood up. He turned to Dr. Say. "Vance, cancel the Livonia build for the Mercer slab," Albright said. "This is the system we're taking to City Council on Monday." The celebration in the lab lasted 5 minutes before the room emptied. By 4 in the afternoon, the lab was quiet again. Kendra Ramos was helping Amara unbolt the tank from the rig when Marcus Chen came down the concrete stairs, his face pale and his eyes fixed on the floor. "Amara," Chen said quietly, "Dean Vance wants to see you in his office on the 3rd floor. Now." Kendra stopped wiping down the steel rails. "Don't go up there without a student advocate." "Amara, I know how Vance works." "I don't need an advocate," Amara said. She took off her safety glasses, placed Volume 6 into her canvas bag, and smoothed down the front of her navy blazer. "I have the data." The 3rd floor office of the Associate Dean was carpeted in dark gray wool, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the North Campus diag. Dr. Vance was seated behind a walnut desk. On the desk was an open folder labeled with Amara's name, along with a formal memo from the university's Academic Integrity Committee. Sitting in a leather armchair beside the window was a man Amara had not seen before, an attorney in a charcoal suit wearing a gold lapel pin bearing the university seal. "Sit down, Miss Osei," Dr. Vance said, not pointing to a chair. Amara remained standing. "We have a serious matter to discuss," Vance said, leaning his elbows on the desk. "Following the demonstration this afternoon, Mr. Mercer filed a formal inquiry regarding the origin of your helical pile drainage design." "The design is mine," Amara said. "The concept of expanded shale sleeves on helical pilings is proprietary technology," Vance said, tapping a document in the folder. "It was patented 3 years ago by a consulting firm in Troy, Michigan, a firm that provides structural consulting to the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department. The Dutch research was published in 1974. Amara replied instantly. "It is in the public domain. The patent in Troy applies only to pre-stressed concrete columns, not steel, helical piles with integrated aggregate sleeves. The mathematical load transfers are completely different." The attorney by the window shifted, his eyes narrowing. "You seem very familiar with the Troy patent, Miss Osei." "I memorized the patent registry for Great Lakes Foundation Systems in November," Amara said. "It was in Volume 4 of my prep work for the National Challenge. patent number US 84219, filed by Dr. Mercer Sr. She looked directly at Vance, Julian Mercer's father. Vance's face hardened into stone. The issue is not the patent, Miss Osei. The issue is unauthorized access to departmental data. The bore logs you cited for the East Jefferson corridor, the ones you claimed, showed a shear modulus of 28, are classified municipal infrastructure data, not available to undergraduate students. They were published in the Detroit Free Press Public Records Archive in April 2024, Amara said. During the City Council budget hearings on the Connor Creek pumping station, anyone with a library card can download them. That is enough, Vance said, his voice rising for the first time. The integrity of this department does not rest on what an incoming freshman finds in a public newspaper archive. The Fellowship Review Board has suspended the pilot selection pending an investigation into your source materials. Furthermore, under Section 8 of the Fellowship Code of Conduct, your $40,000 tuition scholarship is placed on provisional hold until the academic panel convenes next Thursday. On what grounds? Amara asked, her voice dropping into the absolute stillness she had used in Washington before buzzing on the Arrhenius equation. On the grounds of irregular research methodology and conduct unbecoming a department fellow, Vance said, closing the folder with a sharp, heavy snap. You will surrender your access badge to Station 4 immediately. You are barred from the geotechnical testing floor until the hearing. At 6:30, Amara stood at the bus stop on Bonnie Steele Boulevard, the canvas bag over her shoulder. The heat of the afternoon had broken into a heavy, humid twilight. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her father. Bus route finished early. Mama made jollof. We are waiting for you. She did not answer immediately. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the bus shelter. The navy blazer, the 12 buttons, her mother's seams, tight and straight across the shoulders. Another bus pulled up, but it wasn't the commuter to Detroit. It was the campus maintenance van. The window rolled down. Uncle Boateng looked out from the driver's seat. The security guard told me they turned off your key card, Boateng said in Twi. Yes, Amara answered. Boateng looked at the sky. Dark storm clouds were rolling in from the southwest. The heavy summer squall that had been building over Lake Erie all afternoon. The rain is coming, Boateng said. The rain does not wait for the committee on Thursday. He unlocked the passenger door from the inside. Get in. Where are we going? Amara asked. To Detroit, Boateng said. Putting the van into gear. Jefferson Chalmers. The Connor Creek pump has already lost power. The storm hit Detroit at 8:45 with 3 inches of rain falling in 40 minutes. By the time the maintenance van reached East Jefferson Avenue, the street was already disappearing beneath 6 inches of brown river surge. Water was bubbling up through the manhole covers along Continental Street, exactly where the city had planned to break ground on the pilot housing project on Monday morning. Parked at the flooded curb was a city emergency vehicle, its yellow strobes cutting through the sheets of rain. Marcus Albright was standing in rubber boots beside a 6-foot excavation trench, holding an industrial flashlight, watching the water rise toward an exposed foundation, test wall that had been poured by the city contractors 2 weeks earlier, a wall built according to Dr. Rye, Vance's standard state survey specifications. The concrete wall was groaning under the pressure. Hairline cracks were spreading across the wet footing like spiderwebs. Albright turned as the maintenance van pulled up and Amara stepped out into the pouring rain. Her navy blazer instantly soaked through, her boots sinking into the saturated clay. Miss Osei. Albright yelled over the roar of the rain and the diesel pumps. The wall is shearing at the base. The clay underneath has turned to soup. If this footing fails, The water breaks into the basement of the senior center next door in 20 minutes. Did they install the relief vents? Amara shouted back. Walking straight to the edge of the pit, Vance's team said the relief vents would compromise the slab's structural density. Albright yelled, his face tight with fury. They poured it solid. Amara looked into the trench. The water pressure behind the solid slab was building at 40 pounds per square foot per minute. She took volume 6 out of her bag, wrapped it in her plastic folder, and handed it to Boateng. Uncle, she said, get the rotary hammer drill and the 3-inch diamond coring bit from the back of your van. Boateng didn't ask a single question. He ran to the rear doors. Albright grabbed her arm. Miss Osei, you can't go down there. If that footing shears while you're in the pit, the footing will shear in 8 minutes if we don't relieve the hydrostatic pressure, Amara said, looking Albright dead in the eye. The shear line is 3 inches above the lower rebar mat. If we core 3 release holes through the base slab into the aggregate layer below, the water will vent into the trench, and the pressure behind the wall drops 60%. You calculated that? Albright asked. I calculated it 2 years ago at a fence on Mack Avenue when I was 7, Amara said, pulling off her wet blazer and folding it carefully, laying it on the dry front seat of the van. Give me the drill. Down in the muddy pit, the water was up to Amara's knees. The roar of the storm was deafening, the rain hammering against the concrete wall as she braced the heavy 30-pound rotary drill against the base of the slab. The vibration rattled through her collarbones as the diamond teeth bit into the high-strength concrete. Crack. A fissure opened 6 inches above her head. A jet of muddy water shot out through the crack, hitting her chest like a fist. Amara! Albright shouted from the top of the trench. The top anchor is giving way. Get out of the pit. Hold the generator line, she screamed back. She leaned her entire body weight into the drill. The diamond bit punched through the final inch of concrete into the lower gravel bed. Instantly, a geyser of trapped water erupted through the newly cored hole. Spraying 6 feet into the air, the pressure behind the wall plummeted. The groaning of the concrete stopped. She moved 2 feet to the left. She set the bit. She started the second hole. At the top of the trench, 2 sets of high-beam headlights cut through the torrential rain. A university vehicle pulled up, followed by a luxury black SUV. Dr. Preston Vance stepped out into the downpour, accompanied by Julian Mercer's father, Dr. Arthur Mercer, and 2 campus security officers. Albright! Vance shouted across the flooded lawn, holding an umbrella against the wind. What is happening here? That student has been suspended from all project activities. You are violating university jurisdiction on a municipal test site. Marcus Albright didn't even turn around. He stood at the edge of the pit, holding the safety rope connected to Amara's harness as the second release hole punched through the concrete with a loud, sucking gasp of venting water. Preston. Albright yelled back through the storm, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of the senior center. Your slab was 30 seconds from tearing out the foundation of this entire block. If that girl doesn't drill the third hole, this whole street is under 4 feet of river. Dr. Arthur Mercer stepped forward, his expensive overcoat soaking in the rain, looking down into the muddy pit. He saw a 17-year-old girl in a mud-soaked King High School track shirt, braced against the shuddering concrete wall with an industrial drill. Water spraying across her face, her hands steady on the steel grips, driving the bit straight into the load-bearing shear plane with surgical, unyielding precision. Above them, on the street, The red emergency warning siren on the Connor Creek pumping station began to wail a long, rising scream that signaled the main river levee, 2 blocks east, had just suffered a catastrophic breach. A wall of black water 3 feet high turned the corner off Jefferson Avenue, rushing straight down Continental toward the open trench. Amara looked up from the bottom of the pit. The 3rd hole wasn't finished. The drill bit was stuck in the rebar, and the water was coming. The siren on the pumping station rose to a continuous, piercing howl that tore through the sound of the rain. Down on Jefferson, the black surge from the river was already lifting parked cars off their tires. The headlights of an abandoned sedan sweeping across the flooded lawns as the current spun it sideways into a fire hydrant. "Amara, drop the line!" Marcus Albright screamed from the lip of the trench. Throwing his full weight onto the safety rope, "The levee broke at the marina. You have 20 seconds before the surge hits this pit." In the muddy trench, Amara did not drop the drill. Her boots were buried 4 inches deep in the churning gray clay at the bottom of the excavation. The diamond-tipped bit was jammed tight between 2 strands of grade, 6-0 steel rebar, 30 inches into the solid concrete footing. The motor was whining, smoking against the wet air. The thermal overload switch clicking inside the housing as the drill fought the steel. She didn't pull back. She reached down with her left hand into the flooded sludge, found the reverse lever on the gear housing by feel, slammed it into counter-rotation, and hit the trigger with her shoulder braced against the vibrating casing. The bit kicked hard, throwing her left wrist against the rough concrete wall, the skin scraping raw from palm to forearm. The bit spun free. "Miss Osei! Get out of the hole! Doctor!" Vance was at the edge of the trench now, his umbrella turned inside out by the wind, his gold glasses splattered with mud, his voice cracking on the wind. "That is an order! The liability!" "Shut up." "Preston!" Albright barked, shoving Vance back 3 paces onto the grass. Albright leaned out over the open drop, his hand outstretched. "Amara, take my hand!" Amara reset her boots into the sludge. She looked at the 3rd mark she had chalked on the concrete 30 minutes earlier, the exact geometric center of the hydraulic shear cone she had calculated in Volume 6 under the lamp in her bedroom in Detroit. If she didn't punch the 3rd vent, the hydrostatic back pressure would lift the entire 300-ton slab from the bottom up the moment the river surge hit the pit, rolling the foundation directly into the load-bearing brick footings of the senior center next door. 10 seconds! Boateng yelled, bracing his heels against the curb, holding the secondary safety line with his thick, scarred hands. "My daughter! The water's at the fence!" Amara set the diamond bit against the 3rd mark. She didn't look at the street. She didn't look at the 3-foot wall of river water crashing through the chain-link perimeter 50 feet away. She leaned her whole chest against the rear handle of the drill, closed her eyes against the flying grit, and squeezed the trigger. The drill screamed. The diamond teeth chewed through 4 inches of cured aggregate in 5 seconds. Hit the rebar, sparked bright orange under the muddy water, and punched through the outer face into the lower drainage sleeve. A 3rd jet of black water erupted through the slab with the force of a fire main, hitting Amara square in the chest, knocking her backward into the slurry. "Pull!" Albright roared. Boateng and Albright hauled on the twin nylon lines together, their boots sliding in the mud, their shoulders tearing against the load. They ripped Amara out of the sludge 3 feet ahead of the river surge. The wall of black river water poured over the lip of the excavation pit like a waterfall, filling the trench with 4,000 gallons of churning debris in 6 seconds. The hydraulic shock wave slammed into the foundation wall with a sound like a freight train hitting a concrete bridge pier. Arthur Mercer grabbed his son Julian by the jacket. dragging him back toward the SUV as the water swirled around their knees. Everyone on the lawn froze. The water inside the pit rose to the rim, and then, instead of lifting the foundation slab and rolling it into the senior center, the surface of the floodwater began to spin in three massive, violent whirlpools. The three release holes Amara had drilled were venting the surge straight through the aggregate sleeve into the lower relief channels, draining the hydrostatic head as fast as the river could pour it in. The groaning of the building stopped. The concrete wall held dead, level, and true. On the front lawn of the senior center, 60 elderly residents who had been standing at the second-floor windows looking down into the dark began tapping against the glass, their faces illuminated by the amber strobes of the city emergency truck. Amara lay on the wet grass on her back, her king-high track shirt soaked in gray clay, her left forearm bleeding into the mud, her chest heaving against the cold rain. Uncle Boateng walked over, bent down, and picked up her canvas bag from the dry seat of the van. He pulled out the navy blazer dry, untouched, 12 brass buttons catching the strobes, and draped it gently over her shoulders. "The ground knows," Boateng said softly in Twi. "The ground knows who built it." Marcus Albright stood over Dr. Vance, water dripping from his chin, pointing a single shaking finger at the churning whirlpools in the pit. "Preston," Albright said, his voice dropping into a register that made the campus security officers step back 2 paces. "If I see your face on this municipal project site again, I will have the city prosecutor indict you for criminal engineering negligence before lunch tomorrow." Albright turned to Dr. Deff. "Arthur Mercer. And you." "Mercer," Albright said. "Take your son. Take your proprietary sand slab patent and get off my road." Arthur Mercer looked at the pit. He looked at the 3 whirlpools holding the foundation solid against 3 feet of river flood. He looked at his son Julian, whose face was the color of wet chalk. Arthur Mercer did not say a single word. He turned, got into his vehicle, slammed the door, and left. Friday morning at 8 o'clock. The sun came up over Ann Arbor through a washed-out, cloudless blue sky. The main administrative boardroom on the 4th floor of the Fleming Administration Building was full. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Dean of Engineering Dr. Sarah Al-Mansour, a world-renowned seismic structural analyst who had spent 30 years designing suspension bridges across the Pacific Rim. Seated to her right was the university provost. Seated to her left was Marcus Albright, carrying a waterlogged steel diamond core drill bit and 3 high-resolution strain gauge readouts pulled from the Jefferson Chalmers pit at 5 that morning. At the far end of the table sat Dr. Preston Vance, accompanied by 2 university legal counsels. Vance's linen jacket was gone, replaced by a dark suit, his hands clasped tightly over an unopened manila folder. The double doors opened. Amara Osei walked in. Her left forearm was wrapped in clean white medical gauze from wrist to elbow. She was wearing a fresh white shirt, dark trousers, and the navy blazer. Every seam straight, all 12 buttons fastened. Behind her walked Joseph and Abena Osei, who had caught the 6:30 commuter bus from Detroit. Joseph, wearing his dark Sunday church suit. Abena, carrying a small leather purse in both hands. "Please be seated," Dean Al-Mansour said. Her voice was quiet, resonant, and carried the specific authority of a person who had spent her career measuring real-world forces that do not negotiate with academic politics. Amara sat. Joseph and Abena sat on either side of her, their backs completely straight. not looking at the lawyers or the mahogany table, looking only at their daughter. Dean Al-Mansour turned to Dr. Vance. "Dr. Vance," the dean said, "you submitted a formal request yesterday afternoon for the immediate termination of Miss Osei's Great Lakes Fellowship and the revocation of her $40,000 merit scholarship, citing academic irregularity and unauthorized site access." Dean Al-Mansour. Vance began, his voice carefully modulated. "The departmental protocols regarding site safety and research chain of custody are explicit. While the events of last night were dramatic, we cannot allow undergraduate students to bypass university oversight." "Dr. Vance," Dean Al-Mansour interrupted, picking up the strain gauge printout Marcus Albright had laid on the table. "At 8:15 last night, the Connor Creek levee failed under a 3-foot storm surge." She laid the paper down with a crisp slap. "Your proprietary post-tensioned foundation design, which you approved for the Livonia full-scale trial and recommended for municipal deployment, was modeled to withstand 45 megapascals of sub-base shear resistance." Al-Mansour leaned forward. "The real-time sensor logs from the Jefferson-Chalmers test wall show the sub-base shear dropped to 19 megapascals at 8:20. If Miss Osei had not drilled those 3 relief vents through the footing between 8:30 and 8:40, your foundation would have suffered an explosive shear failure at 8:41. The structural collapse would have destroyed the west wing of the Jefferson Senior Community, which was housing 64 residents at the time." The 2 university attorneys looked down at their legal pads. Neither of them made a mark on the paper. "Furthermore," Dean Al-Mansour continued, her dark eyes locking onto Vance with the cold finality of a load-bearing beam hitting its limit, "an audit of the department's research server conducted at midnight revealed that the 2024 municipal bore logs for the East Jefferson corridor were uploaded to your personal research drive 13 months ago, and subsequently marked as restricted to prevent their inclusion in the public fellowship design packets." Vance's face drained of whatever color it had left. "Dan, that was an administrative classification pending patent review. That was academic fraud." "Preston," Al-Mansour said, her voice dropping to a whisper that filled the entire boardroom, "you suppressed legitimate soil mechanics data to protect a commercial foundation patent held jointly by yourself and Mercer Engineering." She pushed a document across the table to the university provost. "Dr. Vance is relieved of his administrative duties as associate dean, effective immediately. His tenure status is referred to the Board of Regents for formal revocation proceedings under Section 6 of the faculty bylaws." Vance sat motionless. The gold pen in his hand slipped from his fingers, rolling across the mahogany until it stopped against the legal pad. Dean Al-Mansour turned her attention to the end of the table. She looked at Joseph Osei, whose hands were folded on the table thick, scarred hands that had worked 20 years of plastic molds in Ypsilanti and 12 years of steering wheels on the Detroit city routes. She looked at Abena Osei, who was sitting with her chin up, her fingers resting lightly on the sleeve of the navy blazer she had sewn under a kitchen lamp on Mack Avenue. And then she looked at Amara. "Miss Osei," Dean Al-Mansour said, "the university's Great Lakes Urban Resilience Fellowship is not revoked." She pulled a heavy blue folder from her briefcase and opened it. "The City of Detroit has formally approved the implementation of your aggregate sleeve helical pile system for the entire 30-block Jefferson-Chalmers resilience pilot. The $500,000 research grant is assigned directly to you as the primary undergraduate investigator, under my personal faculty supervision." Al-Mansour picked up an official university document bearing the gold seal of the College of Engineering. "In addition, the college has named you the recipient of the 2026 Distinguished Engineering Presidential Fellowship. providing a full 4-year academic and research endowment. Dean Al-Mansour stood up. The provost stood up. Marcus Albright stood up. At the far end of the table, Joseph Osei stood up slowly, putting his hand on his daughter's shoulder, his fingers pressing into the navy wool of the blazer his wife had made. Amara stood. She looked at Dean Al-Mansour. She did not smile. And she did not look at Dr. Vance as he gathered his papers and left the room through the side door with the 2 university lawyers following in silence. "Thank you. Dean Al-Mansour," Amara said, her voice clear, round, and steady, the same voice she had used in 7th grade when Mr. Hassan first told her that the world was made of leverage points. "I need the soil bore logs for the lower Rouge River Basin by 2 o'clock. We start the foundation calculations for the next section tomorrow." Dean Al-Mansour looked at the 17-year-old girl in the 12-button blazer, nodded once, with the specific respect of an engineer who has finally met another engineer, and said, "They're already on your desk at Station 4. Miss Osei, go build your ground." The file on 1422 Carver did not go to court in February. It went into a shredder on the 3rd floor of the municipal building on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. 5 days after the narcotics unit arrested 4 men in the 2nd floor hallway and found $22,000 in cash, a hydraulic press, and 3 ledgers that never made it into evidence. Darnell Crew learned about the shredder at 7:15 in the morning, standing in the precinct break room with a cardboard cup of chicory coffee, when Detective Vance Sterling walked in. Sterling was 48, wore custom-tailored charcoal suits that smelled of sandalwood and clove, and had spent 14 years in special investigations making sure that high-profile arrests on the South Side stayed tidy enough for the evening news without disturbing the commercial development corridor planned along Carver Boulevard. "Crew," Sterling said, stirring 2 packets of raw sugar into an espresso mug. "Heard you did some footwork on that 1422 property." "I brought the neighborhood log to Sergeant Holloway," Darnell said. Holloway handed it up. "Right. The civilian notebook." Sterling didn't look at Darnell. He watched the brown foam spin in his cup. Elderly woman on the 3rd floor with a set of binoculars and too much time. Good color for a patrol narrative. But the prosecutor's office reviewed the chain of custody on the initial surveillance tips. Unvetted civilian surveillance presents severe 4th Amendment suppression risks on the entry warrant. The whole case was vulnerable to a tainted fruit motion. Darnell set his coffee on the counter. The cardboard buckled slightly under his thumb. The warrant was based on 3 controlled buys executed by narcotics officers in January. Detective, Mrs. Elstrom's notes were just the timeline that showed them where to sit. Sterling took a slow sip, tapped the rim of his porcelain cup with his gold signet ring, and finally turned his head. His eyes were cold, heavy-lidded, and completely still. The buys were compromised by a faulty confidential informant log. "Officer, the defense attorney was going to subpoena your 90-year-old schoolteacher and put her on the stand to ask how she distinguished package deliveries from contraband handoffs through a cracked window pane. You want a frail old lady with a heart condition sitting under cross-examination for 3 days while a federal defense team tears her sanity apart on public record?" "She's 78, Darnell said. "Her mind is sharper than yours." Sterling's smile was thin, razor-edged, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Her name isn't on the docket." Crew. The 4 men took plea agreements on misdemeanor trespassing and simple possession. Time served. The property is clear. In 60 days. The Carver Street corridor goes to the land bank for municipal auction. The city needs that block cleared for the light rail expansion. Not tied up in 5 years of federal civil forfeiture appeals. You did your job. The street is quiet. Let it be quiet. The money in the second-floor wall, Darnell said, his voice dropping into that flat, quiet register he used when the asphalt went sideways. There was a hydraulic press. You don't press brick powder for misdemeanor possession. Sterling stepped closer. So close the smell of clove and wet wool filled the narrow space between the coffee machine and the lockers. You're a patrolman with 2 years on this beat and a 6-year-old daughter sleeping in a rented flat on Vine. You want to make detective. You learn when an operation is finished. If you keep poking around the ownership deed on 1422, you aren't going to like whose signature is on the holding company. Go walk your post, officer, and tell your little old lady to find a crossword puzzle. Darnell walked the 1400 block of Carver at noon. The rain had turned the gutters into churning gray ribbons. The front doors of 1422 were padlocked with heavy yellow municipal chains, but the plywood across the ground floor windows had already been pried back at the corners. On the stoop sat 2 young men wearing matching black rain jackets, neither of them older than 19. Smoking menthols under the concrete overhang with the specific, relaxed arrogance of people who knew the police had already come and gone. Darnell didn't look at them. He looked up at the 3rd-floor window of the green building across the street. The lace curtain was parted 2 inches. Margaret Elstrom was standing behind the glass, her hands resting on the horizontal bar of her walker, looking down at the stoop with her mouth set in a straight, hard line. He climbed the stairs to apartment 3B at 3:15. The tea was already poured. 2 bone china mugs sat on the lace doily on the desk, the steam rising toward a fresh drawing pinned to the corkboard, Amara's 3 sparrows, their wings colored in thick, determined strokes of violet and red wax. They're back. Mrs. Elstrom said before Darnell could set his hat on the small round table by the door. I saw them, Darnell said. Not the same ones, she said, tapping her finger on an open spiral notebook. The boy with the gray boots, his name is Trevon. His mother works the night laundry at Carver General with Denise. He was recruited 3 weeks ago by a man who drives a silver Lexus with temporary dealer plates. The dealer plates belong to an auto group on 8th Street. Darnell sat down in the study chair. He didn't touch the tea. The precinct closed the file. Mrs. Elstrom. They took plea deals on the 4 from February. Misdemeanors. Mrs. Elstrom didn't blink. She turned a page in her notebook with a dry, rustling snap. Of course they did. The building doesn't belong to the boys in the hallway. It belongs to Carver Corridor Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware, managed through an agency on West 4th. The principal agent on the incorporation document is Marcus Sterling. Darnell looked at her. Detective Vance, Sterling's brother. Vance Sterling's twin brother. She corrected, her blue eyes fixing on him with the cold precision of a chemist balancing a lethal equation. Marcus runs the bail bond office behind the courthouse. When the city council approved the tax abatements for the light rail project last November, Carver Corridor Holdings bought 8 properties between 9th and 12th on Carver Street for pennies because the neighborhood was considered an active narcotics zone. If the block is dangerous, the property values stay depressed. The owners buy the parcels cheap. When the city uses eminent domain for the rail line, the LLC gets compensated at commercial market value. LLC. She pushed a manila folder across the desk. Inside were 12 photocopied title transfers, 3 corporate filings, and 44 hand-drawn license plate logs dating back to the previous summer. They aren't running drugs to make money off drugs. Darnell, she said, her voice dropping into a register that made the old study feel suddenly freezing cold. They're running drugs to keep the rent down until the city buys them out. And they're using children from this neighborhood to do it because children don't go to state prison when they get caught. Darnell touched the edge of the folder. If I take this to the commander, Sterling will have the file buried before it hits her inbox. He's the liaison to the city attorney's office. Then don't take it to the commander. Mrs. Elstrom said, take it to the woman who buys the steel. At 4:30, Darnell stood in the parking lot behind Carver High School, where the second shift of district maintenance was loading salt spreaders for the freezing drizzle coming off the river. Priya Voss was 42, wore steel-toed boots, a yellow, high-visibility parka, and carried an industrial clipboard with a cracked acrylic corner. She had been Carver High's class of 2001, had spent 20 years in municipal public works, and currently served as the Chief Infrastructure and Procurement Officer for the Regional Transit Authority. She was also the girl who had failed Mrs. Path Elstrom's chemistry midterm twice in 1999, before spending 3 weeks after school learning how to calculate the tensile strength of bridge cables over a Bunsen burner. Priya looked at the manila folder Darnell handed her, then looked past his shoulder at the patrol cruiser idling under the floodlights. Mrs. Elstrom sent you. Priya said, it wasn't a question. She said you understood why things broke down. Darnell replied. Priya opened the folder under the yellow halogen glare. She read 3 pages. Her thumb, tracing the legal descriptions of the parcels along the 1400 block. Her jaw worked slowly, the muscle jumping against her cheek. The Transit Authority Board is voting on the final land acquisitions for the Carver line on Thursday morning. Priya said quietly. The appraisal report submitted by the City Development Agency listed 1,422 Carver as a blighted residential structure requiring immediate public acquisition for safety remediation. Recommended purchase price, $840,000. How much did Carver Corridor Holdings buy it for? Darnell asked. $62,000. Priya said, 9 months ago, at a sheriff's tax auction. She closed the folder with a sharp, heavy slap that sounded like a pistol shot in the cold garage. The appraisal report was signed by Vance Sterling's former partner at the city attorney's office. Priya said, if I pull the structural survey on that block, I can hold the purchase vote for 60 days pending an independent environmental review. But the moment I flag that parcel, Vance Sterling will know who pulled the string. Let him know, Darnell said. Priya looked at him, her eyes dark and fierce beneath the hood of her parka. He won't come after me. Officer Crew, Ajay, I have a union contract and 15 years of civil service tenure. He'll come after the man on the street who handed me the paper, and he'll come after the old woman who wrote it. She's 80 years old in 3 months. Darnell said, she's not afraid of Vance Sterling. She should be. Priya said, Vance isn't just dirty. He's protected. The retaliation did not wait for Thursday. On Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, Darnell arrived at the precinct for roll call to find his locker padlocked with an orange departmental inspection seal. Sergeant Holloway was standing by the desk, looking down at the muster sheet, his face gray and set. Internal Affairs pulled your logs from yesterday. Darnell, Holloway said, not looking him in the eye. An anonymous complaint was filed with the Civilian Oversight Board at 7 this morning. Alleges an off-duty officer was seen soliciting information from a confidential resident on Carver Street and using department resources to run vehicle registrations for non-law enforcement purposes. The registrations were logged in the public county database at the public library. Sarge, Darnell said. Doesn't matter. Holloway muttered. Sterling's unit took the paperwork. Commander Prentice was ordered by the deputy chief to place you on modified duty pending an administrative inquiry. Hand over your service weapon. Your badge. And your patrol radio. Darnell stood in the center of the squad room. 12 officers. Men he had backed up on domestic calls. Men who had sat with him in the hospital waiting room when Maya died looked down at their clipboards. Looked at their boots. Looked everywhere except at him. Darnell unclipped his duty belt. He laid the heavy leather rig on the desk. The radio. The cuffs. The Glock 17. And the gold shield with his badge number engraved across the center. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out Amara's folded drawing of the police car with the yellow circle badge, and slid it into his civilian jacket. "Who took over the Carver Foot Patrol?" Darnell asked. Holloway hesitated. "Curtis Hale." "Hale is 24 years old," Darnell said, his voice dropping into that quiet, cold iron. "He doesn't know the difference between the boys on the corner and the boys running the stoop. Trevin is 17. If Hale goes in there throwing leather, someone's going to pull a gun. It's not your beat anymore." "Darnell," Holloway said, his voice cracking slightly, "go home to your girl." Darnell didn't go home. He took the city bus to Carver and 9th. The rain had stopped, replaced by a biting northern wind that whistled through the chain-link fences along the abandoned rail spur. He walked past Solomon's hardware store. The windows were dark, but the open sign was flipped to the street, inside. Solomon and his nephew Aaron were stacking 50-pound bags of concrete mix by the counter. Solomon saw Darnell through the glass, dropped his hand truck, and came to the door, wiping his dusty palms on his blue apron. "Darnell," Solomon said, looking at Darnell's plain clothes, his eyes dropping immediately to the empty waistband where the holster usually sat. Words already down the avenue. 2 cruisers from the South Precinct rolled through at 10. They took Denise's boy off the stoop at 1,422. Darnell felt the cold air hit the back of his throat. Trevin? They found 3 ounces of cut powder in his backpack. Solomon said, his voice shaking with a deep, rumbling fury. "Plant. Obvious plant." The kid was crying so hard he couldn't stand up. They didn't take him to juvenile intake. They took him to the holding annex on 4th Street, the one Marcus Sterling runs the bail office out of. "Where is Denise?" "She's at the hospital," Solomon said. "Tried to leave her shift, and her supervisor told her if she clocked out before 3, she was terminated. Erin's watching her little ones at our house." Darnell turned toward the street. "Darnell, wait," Solomon called out, catching his sleeve with a rough, calloused hand. "Sterling's brother Marcus was by here an hour ago. Left a message for Mrs. Elstrom. Said if the Green Buildings Tenant Association files a structural protest with the Transit Board tomorrow morning. The city building inspector is condemning the whole property for electrical violations by noon. He said 78-year-old women don't do well in emergency shelters." Darnell looked down at Solomon's hand on his coat. "Tell Aaron to keep the children inside until I get back." "Where are you going?" "To the 3rd floor," Darnell said. The front door of the green building was unlocked. The hallway smelled of scorched wire and wet plaster. On the 2nd floor landing, Cecile was standing in her doorway with her 3 children behind her, their coats on. 2 plastic laundry baskets filled with clothes sitting on the linoleum. "Officer Crew," Cecile whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "A man came with a yellow clipboard 20 minutes ago. He said the building was red-tagged. He said the marshals are coming at 5 to clear the units. Go upstairs to Mrs. Elstrom's apartment. Jezile," Darnell said gently. "Take the children. Lock the deadbolt from the inside and don't open it for anyone except me or Diana." "Is it true?" she asked, her voice breaking. Are we losing the rooms? Nobody is losing anything today, Darnell said. Go upstairs. He went up the final flight of stairs, 2 at a time. Apartment 3B was open. Mrs. Elstrom was sitting at her desk. She was wearing her good wool coat, navy blue, with bone buttons, and her walker was folded against the wall beside the door. On the desk sat her telephone, off the hook, buzzing with a steady, off-cadence dial tone. Sitting in the armchair across from her was Vance Sterling. Sterling had his overcoat unbuttoned, his gold watch catching the gray light from the window, a manila file open across his knee. Crew, Sterling said, looking up without surprise. You're trespassing on private property subject to a municipal evacuation order. You don't have a badge to wave around today. So that makes this a Class A misdemeanor criminal trespass. Darnell didn't look at Sterling. He looked at Mrs. Elstrom. Are you all right? I am 80 years old in 3 months. Darnell, she said, her voice dry and steady as desert sand. I have survived 2 bouts of pneumonia, 31 years of high school chemistry students, and the City Urban Renewal Commission of 1,974. Detective Sterling is currently explaining to me that my memory is failing. It's not an insult, Mrs. Elstrom, Sterling said smoothly, turning a page in his file. It's a clinical reality. The city attorney's office has an affidavit signed by 3 residents on the first floor stating you've been shouting at delivery drivers from your window for 6 months. Incompetency hearings for elderly tenants in distressed properties are handled on the emergency docket. We can have a conservator appointed by tomorrow afternoon. You'll be placed in a very comfortable county facility in Crestmont. Warm meals. 24-hour nursing. No stairs to worry about. And the deed to this building? Darnell asked, stepping into the room until he was 3 feet from Sterling's chair. The deed will be transferred to the receiver appointed by the court, Sterling said, looking up at Darnell with a slow, toxic grin. Carver Corridor Holdings will manage the property until the Transit Authority acquires the right-of-way. Mrs. Elstrom's estate will receive fair market value, minus the cost of her long-term medical care. Everyone gets taken care of. Darnell, even you. I can have that administrative suspension dropped to a written reprimand by Friday if you walk out that door. Take your daughter to the park. And forget you ever saw a file on 1,422. Darnell stood perfectly still, outside the window. The sparrows on the cornice were silent, huddled against the cold gray stone. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the yellow drawing Amara had given him. That morning, the one of the 3 sparrows with the violet and red wings, and laid it flat on the desk beside Mrs. Elstrom's cold cup of tea. You forgot something. Detective, Darnell said. Sterling let out a short, dismissive bark of laughter. What did I forget? Patrolman? Priya Voss, Darnell said. Sterling's smile flickered, just for a quarter of a second, before settling back into place. Priya Voss is a middle-tier bureaucrat with an asphalt budget. Priya Voss is the chair of the Municipal Procurement Oversight Board. Mrs. Elstrom said, leaning forward in her chair, her blue eyes pinning Sterling to the back of his seat. And at 1 o'clock this afternoon, she exercised Section 14 of the Regional Transit Charter to refer the Carver Corridor acquisition deeds to the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan for criminal real estate, fraud, and racketeering. The dial tone on the open telephone was the only sound in the room. Sterling's face went through 3 distinct changes in 2 seconds. The smooth condescension fell away, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. And then, underneath the calculation. A sudden, violent flare of rage. His cell phone began to vibrate against the leather of his inside pocket. It didn't stop. It vibrated 3 times, paused, and started again, the specific, urgent cadence of a call from an executive exchange. Sterling didn't answer it. He rose from the armchair slowly, his overcoat falling open, his eyes fixed on Darnell's chest. "You think this is over because you found an auditor who remembers high school?" Sterling whispered, his voice shaking with a quiet, venomous intensity. "My brother Marcus is sitting in the district holding facility right now with the boy. If that federal referral isn't withdrawn by 4 o'clock, Trevin signs a confession that says he was distributing out of this apartment for you and Mrs. Elstrom. You think the department won't buy it? A suspended black patrolman and an old woman on a pension running a drop house? I have the preliminary logs already signed." Darnell didn't step back. "The boy doesn't have to sign anything." "Vance," Darnell said, his voice flat as iron. "Because at 2:30 this afternoon, Diana from Family Services walked into that holding annex with a federal magistrate's protective custody order. Trevin is at Carver General right now, sitting in a private room with his mother, giving a recorded statement to 2 postal inspectors and an assistant United States attorney about who handed him that backpack in the alley." Sterling's phone vibrated a 3rd time. Across the room, the heavy tread of 4 sets of boots came up the wooden stairs from the 2nd floor. The door to apartment 3B swung wide. Standing in the frame was Commander Patricia Prentice, flanked by 2 special agents in dark windbreakers bearing the yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Prentice looked at Sterling. She didn't look at his suit. She didn't look at his watch. And she didn't look at the file on his knee. "Detective Vance Sterling," Prentice said, her voice echoing through the small study with the finality of a closing cell door. "Surrender your weapon and your department credentials to Agent Miller. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit municipal fraud, witness intimidation, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Sterling stood frozen between the desk and the window. His hand twitched once toward his inside pocket, then stopped as both federal agents took a half-step forward, their hands resting on their sidearms. He looked at Darnell. He looked at the drawing of the 3 sparrows on the desk. He looked at Mrs. Margaret Elstrom, who was sitting with her calloused hands folded over her notebook, watching him with the same patient, unblinking assessment she had given 1,000 arrogant boys who thought they were too clever for the rules of the room. "You're making a mistake, Commander," Sterling rasped, his voice cracking on the syllables as Agent Miller stepped behind him, pulled his wrists behind his back, and ratcheted the steel cuffs tight around his wrists. "We made the mistake 12 months ago, Vance," Prentice said quietly, "when we didn't read the box." The hallway cleared by 4:45. The sirens died away down Carver Street, their red and blue reflections fading from the wet asphalt as the early March twilight came down over the rooftops. Darnell stood in the small study. The silence of the apartment returned, heavy and deep, filled only with the faint ticking of the mantel clock and the distant sound of Cecile's children laughing on the 2nd floor as Diana helped them unpack the laundry baskets. Mrs. Elstrom reached out her hand, picked up her cold cup of tea, and set it on the corner of the desk. "You have 20 minutes. Darnell," she said quietly. He looked at his watch. It was 3:55. "The school gate opens at 4:15 on Wednesdays," she said, her blue eyes softening into something ancient and infinitely kind. "And your daughter has a drawing she wants to show you." Darnell looked at the table. He picked up his civilian coat, reached down, and took the yellow drawing of the violet-winged sparrows, tucking it carefully into his breast pocket over his heart. "I'll see you on Thursday, Mrs. Elstrom," Darnell said. "Bring your mother," she replied, picking up her pen and opening the spiral notebook to a fresh, clean page. "We have the 1500 block to map before the geraniums bloom." At 4:12, Darnell Crew stood outside the iron gates of Carver Elementary School. The rain had stopped entirely. The clouds, breaking into long, brilliant tiers of amber, and rose across the western sky. The heavy oak doors of the school swung wide, and a river of children poured out onto the sidewalk, their voices rising into the crisp afternoon air like a flock of birds taking flight. Amara came through the gate at a dead run, her purple coat flying open, her small boots splashing through the puddles on the concrete, her backpack with the little elephant bouncing against her shoulders. She saw him standing by the fence. She didn't slow down. She launched herself straight into his chest, her arms wrapping around his neck with the fierce, absolute certainty of a 6-year-old who had never once doubted that her father would be standing on the other side of the gate when the bell rang. Darnell lifted her up, holding her close against the cold air, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart against his collarbone. "Daddy!" she yelled into his ear. Look what I made for Mrs. Elstrom." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, unfolding it with her small, ink-stained fingers. It was a drawing of a street, a wide, clean street with green window boxes on every sill, tall red geraniums reaching for the sun, and 3 sparrows perched together on the roof of a greenhouse, their wings spread wide enough to cover the whole block. "Is it right?" Amara asked, looking up into his face with her large, dark eyes. "Is that what Carver Street looks like?" Darnell looked at the drawing. He looked down the long, quiet avenue stretching toward the river, where the streetlights were beginning to flicker on one by one in the gathering dusk, steady and bright against the dark. "Yeah, baby," Darnell said, his voice level, clear, and finally, completely steady. "That's exactly what it looks like." The Municipal Land Bank canceled the auction of the Carver Street parcels 3 weeks later, transferring the titles to a community development trust overseen by a board of local residents that included Solomon from the hardware store, Denise from Carver General, and Priya Voss. The investigation into the holding companies uncovered 84 fraudulent appraisals across 4 districts, resulting in the indictment of 12 municipal officials and the permanent restructuring of the city's Transit Acquisition Board. Curtis Hale remained on the Carver Foot Patrol, but on Thursday afternoons he walked the 3 blocks to apartment 3B, sat in the small study with a notebook on his knee, and listened while an 80-year-old retired chemistry teacher explained to him how a neighborhood actually works. And on the 3rd-floor windowsill of the green building on Carver Street, between the fresh red geraniums that bloomed on the first warm morning of April, sat a small wooden frame holding a child's drawing of a police car, a bright yellow sun, and 3 sparrows whose wings were wide enough to keep the whole road safe. That is what the work has always been. It was never the badge, and it was never the rank, and it was never the $400,000 appraisal on a piece of paper in a downtown office. It was the choice to stop on a Tuesday afternoon when an old woman's knee gave out on a cracked curb. It was the willingness to sit on a porch at midnight and listen to a scared man talk about his father. It was the 12 minutes spent holding a boy's bleeding hand in the wet grass of an interstate median while the rain came down. Refusing to let your voice shake because someone on the other side of the dark needed to hear a man who hadn't given up. The world is full of people who believe that substance is something you buy, something you wear, something you enforce with a locked door or a threat in a quiet hallway. They look at a threadbare coat, a cracked walker, or a pair of chapped working hands, and they decide in 4 seconds that the person standing in front of them is too small to matter. They get it wrong every single time, because they are looking at the container instead of the foundation. The foundation is built in the dark, 30 seconds at a time, by the people who show up on Thursday afternoons with a hot cup of tea and an open notebook. It is built by the fathers who work the shift nobody wants, so they can stand at the school gate at 4:15 and be taken completely for granted by a child who knows she is loved. It is built by the people who understand that a neighborhood isn't a collection of property parcels to be cleared for a train. It is a living library of names, memories, and connections that hold together only as long as someone is willing to do the quiet, uncredited work of paying attention. This story is fiction, but the pattern is as real as the pavement beneath your feet right now. Every single day. In every city in this country, someone in authority dismisses a voice that holds the exact truth they need to hear, simply because that voice belongs to an old woman in an apartment, a tired mother on a bus, or an officer who refuses to play the game. The question this leaves you with is the only one that ever truly matters when the asphalt gets cold. When was the last time you were in a hurry, full of your own importance, and you chose to slow down, put out your arm, and listen to the person the rest of the room decided was invisible? If this reached you tonight, share it with someone who is still doing the quiet work when nobody is watching. Tell me in the comments about the person who held the road safe for you when you were going down. And subscribe so we can keep putting these names on the record together. The box is already full. The sparrows are already in the cornice. Go be the person who stops.